Hello, hello, and welcome back to another podcast episode of Overpowering Emotions, where I talk all things big emotions, emotion regulation, and of course, self-regulation. I want to start today walking through some of the key self-regulation skills that I've been talking and referring to quite a bit over the past few weeks. We're in the self-regulation mini series. I have already talked about problem solving in previous episodes, so definitely check that out. I've got the link in the show notes for you to look back at that because that is really an important one. But it's really, I always start with emotion regulation. I focus all of my work on this just because the emotional brain is so much stronger than the cognitive brain. And this is really where we can see the biggest progress when we're really working on this stuff. And I find when we're working on the emotion regulation, the cognitive regulation just sort of falls into place. Sometimes we still have to do some explicit things, certainly, but I just find that this is sort of the easiest path. Now, it all starts with emotional literacy. Kids really need to learn to recognize and label their own emotions before we can even, before they can ever manage those emotions. If they're not even aware of them and not even aware of what's going on, then it makes it really hard to know exactly what's going to be helpful, right? Other than just numbing out. And that's usually what they start doing as teenagers and adults. So we want to avoid that. I know I talk about emotional literacy all the time, but it really is such a foundational piece for everything from behavior management to relationships to doing school, everything. Plato actually said all learning has an emotional base, and neuroscience now shows emotion. They really drive our behaviors. They drive even things like attention, memory, decision making. In my self regulation workshops, I always talk about emotion regulation. It has that dual role, which I've also talked about here as well. It can promote self regulation, it can inhibit self regulation. So it starts with emotional literacy. Now, it's more than just knowing if you're happy or sad or angry. It's about, yes, having the language to understand and express what we're feeling inside. So being able to talk about that internal awareness, which we're so disconnected from what's going on internally, right? We really are. And so with all of the stimulation all the time, we've got this screen and that screen and notification, like kids just are so, and I would say adults are so out of touch with what's going on inside, right? So we want to make sure we're doing that in a way that's building self-awareness, that internal awareness, but also connection with other people. So that's going to be really important. When kids can't name or explain what's going on, they become mute, right? So that's when we see behaviors. If they don't have the words, we're going to see meltdowns or shutdowns or avoidance or misdirected behavior. They're going to swear at us and blame us, right? So all of these things. So if they have the vocabulary and the safety to be able to notice, name, and express how they're feeling without a punishing response from an adult. And a punishing response could even be well-intentioned, that we're trying to make them feel better, right? But then we're minimizing and we're invalidating and, all of those problems. So when they can express themselves in a way, in an environment where they are being validated, that's where we see the growth and the empathy and the resilience. Now, research really shows that the ability to differentiate those emotions with granularity, being really specific in how they feel, it's directly linked to better emotion regulation skills, better mental health outcomes. So we want to make sure that they're able to get really granular, really, really specific, not just happy, right? Not just scared. There's so many different variations. And so we want to make sure, is it terrified scared? Is it apprehensive scared, hesitant, a little bit worried, right? So we want to make sure we're really looking at that. So the first step is really about setting the stage with safety and curiosity, right? So we're normalizing the full range of emotions. So that means creating a space where all feelings are okay, even the messy ones, like anger or jealousy, fear, shame, all of those things. We say it's okay for you to feel it, but it's not okay to act, but we're not really setting up the environment. So we really need to play it out so they actually have direct experience that I can feel all of these emotions. And there's not someone over my shoulder trying to talk me out of it or to try to make me feel better. But to start, we're not waiting for emotions to show up. We want to have these regular check ins so that it's just a normal part of our day that we are checking in. So for younger kids, a great entry point is using like an emoji check in, right? So we can ask, if you had to choose an emoji that matches how you're feeling right now, what would it be and why? So we can use physical cards, they could draw them, you could use your phone, right? Just even texting. There's so many different emojis that you could be using. It's just a really simple step, and it's helpful to open the door for emotional expression, especially for kids who might otherwise shrug and say, I'm fine, right? When my kids were both little, we actually had this little magnet. I still have it on the door, actually. And it's a magnet of this cartoon character with every possible emotion on it, right? And there was a slider, and we had different color sliders. So when they came in, all of us, the whole family, just got into the routine of putting our colored slider on how we felt, right? And we still have it on the door, and it can be helpful. And there were times that we would say, okay, we need to look at how the other person is. So if I'm going to ask them something hard, right? Like, how can we do it in a way that's going to fulfill needs, right? Make sure both of our needs are met. So that's kind of that collaborative piece, balancing our needs with their needs as well. But it's just a great way to regularly check in, give a name to how we're feeling, right? We don't have to make it a big deal. It's just a normal part of the day, right? We just want to focus on that. And then they really get into figuring out those different emotions, like if they feel zany, for example. Or at dinner time, you can use something like a mood meter or ask a simple question like, what are three feelings you had today? So we're just getting into the daily practice of checking in. Now, the next step is to teach what those emotions are, right? So for now, we want to get their own sort of internal interpretation. We can be doing these ones concurrently together, but we really want to talk about that those emotions are signals from the brain, signals from the body that tells us what matters, right? So it's signals about something that's happening in the environment around us. They help us take action, right? Whether that's taking action, running away from something dangerous, it could be connecting with others, it could be understanding ourselves, right? So all of those things, we need to understand the function, which I will be getting into in upcoming weeks as well, just so you have a really good idea what's going on there. So for younger kids, we might use emojis. For older kids who can read, you might have an emotion wheel, right? And just talk about the basic emotions like sadness, anger, fear. So we have those sort of, on the inner, those basic ones, those ones we can usually come up with and articulate right away. But then we want to break it down into more specific feelings. So then you go to the outer edges of that, of wheel so you can really get granular, right? So now we might see more specific feelings like disappointed or irritated. So we'll start with the core emotion, but then we're building out with synonyms. So the more specific the name, the more we can tame it. If we can name it, we can tame it. And the more specific, even more so, right? And we're keeping that curiosity prefrontal cortex online. So it's just about being granular to be able to keep that prefrontal cortex online. And it helps us distinguish between annoyed versus frustrated versus resentful or irritated instead of just saying I'm mad, right? Or naming again the difference between terrified, anxious, uneasy, restless, overwhelmed versus just saying stressed, right? They are very different. And there's actually research showing that, right? Most of the time people just say, I'm just so stressed. But when we pull it out, right, we can really start looking at um, being stressed is one thing, because then is it just time management that you need to work on? Is it conflict resolution that you need to work on, right? Like we really want to make sure we're looking at that. Now we can talk about intensity. That can help us differentiate sometimes too between annoyed versus furious, nervous versus terrified, for example. So we can really look at those and tease those out. And that just helps calm the brain already anyways. Not that that's the outcome that we want, it's just through the process. We're keeping that self-regulating brain on, which helps self-regulate all of those emotions, right? So start having discussions. Maybe you're sorting feeling cards, right? Just so that kids are expanding their vocabulary. Maybe you have an emotion word of the day to expand their vocabulary. Maybe you're sorting words. You've got groups like happy, sad, mad, scared, but then you're going to go deeper, right? And so then you need to be able to sort like where does this go under the big type of thing? Or what's difference between you're frustrated and angry. What's the difference between embarrassed versus ashamed? So, for younger kids, you might want to use stories or characters to really highlight the emotional complexity. For teens, maybe we're bringing in music or media or real life scenarios to really sort of fine tune. So, the key focus is yes, we're increasing their capacity, but we're teaching how do we expand that vocabulary in the first place? We want to explicitly teach it like we would teach any sort of vocabulary, but it's not just about naming the broad feeling, it's about naming them accurately, right? It is helpful if they can say, I'm sad. We want to start there. And that's where I started. You know, I always use my girls as an example. I taught them frustrated, right? Or the very basic words when they were itty bitty. But as they get older, you know, if they can say, I'm disappointed or I feel rejected or I'm grieving, we now have more insight into what's going on. And more important, what's needed and what strategies and interventions are actually going to be helpful. So that's why we want to get more precise with our emotional vocabulary. So we as the adults can respond, you know, to their needs better, and they can respond to their own needs and communicate more clearly with others. With words, able to communicate how they're feeling, we're not going to see so many behaviors or other maladaptive coping strategies, right? And we just know if they have better emotional granularity, they can name their emotions with that great specificity, they're less likely to feel overwhelmed by their emotions. They're more likely to recover quickly from stress. They're better able to make decisions under pressure. They're more skilled at conflict resolution and relationship management. They're just more resilient and more successful socially, emotionally. It's because naming those emotions creates a psychological distance, right? I always say, if we put our hands up to our face, right, up to our nose, if our hands are our emotions, we're stuck there. We're getting caught up, we're spiraling, we're just getting overwhelmed with that emotion. If we can pull our hands out, the emotion's still there, but we can see the bigger context. We're keeping that self regulating brain online and we're creating that psychological distance. Okay, because when we're labeling what we feel, we activate the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain specifically for reasoning, reflection, rational thinking, self regulation. And that's what helps us regulate the emotion instead of being hijacked by it. Because otherwise, the Wi Fi goes offline to that part of the brain. And even in clinical practice, we know that in research, but even in clinical practice, I see it all the time. When kids can shift from saying, I'm angry to I'm embarrassed, everything changes. Now we're dealing with the real issue. And automatically their behaviors shift too, from angry to embarrassed. We see a major shift just in everything, their body language, how they're behaving, how they're interacting. So, teaching the kids the function or the purpose of different emotions is really important because we need to have them all. We never want to get rid of them. We never want to talk about feelings as good or bad because then they're going to try to suppress the ones that they think are bad. And that's why I don't like things like zones of regulation or when we use red, red is signifies bad all of the time and it's just pleasant or unpleasant. And that's how I talk about some emotions feel pleasant, some emotions feel unpleasant or uncomfortable. And so that's the way that I like to talk about it versus good, bad, positive, negative. And I will be getting into the specific functions of emotions coming up. So definitely stay tuned in the coming weeks for those episodes. And I'm going to be breaking it really down, even like the pleasant emotions, unpleasant emotions, and they have different energy around them too. So I'll be talking about all of that and then specifically specific strategies that we need to do to get at those needs. But we want kids to get curious about emotions and ask things like, how am I feeling? What made me feel that way? And we might not even know, and that's okay. But what is the signal trying to tell me right now? That's the point. It doesn't really matter about the trigger. It's just, what do I need right now? So that's important. Once we have that, we want to connect those emotions to the body and the brain, right? Help kids identify how emotions show up. So in the body, we might feel like a racing heart. We might feel stomach aches. We might feel clenched fists. That can be really tricky for a lot of kids, especially if they don't have that interoceptive awareness. They don't have that internal knowledge of what's going on for them. So maybe it's in their behavior, right? So we want to start at an entry point that makes sense for them because everybody has a different entry point. So some it is physiological. For a lot, I would say it is physiological, especially since COVID. We've misinterpreted a lot of, physical feelings for real medical sort of emergencies. But it might be in their behavior. We might see crying or snapping at others or shutting down or over talking or getting silly or running away. Maybe it's in stories that they're telling themselves, right? Or they're hearing from their henchmen, I'm not good enough. No one's going to like me. So we want to look at how is it showing up for them, and we can use those as entry points. And then as they get more specific and more aware, we can start looking at all of the pieces because we know all of those pieces are part of what makes up the emotions. So that's really important. And you can use things like an emotion detective game where we're asking, what are three signs someone might feel anxious or someone might feel excited? That's just building some emotional insight and empathy. And maybe we can be watching videos, right? Kids love watching videos. So maybe we can be detectives for other people, but now we want to start being detectives for ourselves. So we just want to make sure at the end of the day that they're really practicing throughout the day. We're dropping in, but using real life scenarios as well. You could use role play, and I think that that's helpful, especially for younger kids. Especially if we're going to role play situations that they know are coming up, or maybe to role play situations that have happened. Or maybe we're going to role play a situation that we're going to now create in the real world, right? So your sibling is going to do something that's really going to frustrate you. So let's practice now, right? They've come, you were working on this art project and they come and rip the paper or they put a big black marker right through it. Let's practice what you're going to do now. Now we're going to go into the real situation where their sibling really does come big black marker through it. Right. So we want to do those. I mean, you could use scenario cards, right? You studied hard, you failed for a test. What might you feel? How can you express that in a healthy way? But I would love it, the real world, right? If they do have an upcoming test, right? Let's talk about that. Discuss those body cues, the thoughts, the actions, just giving them a safe space to experiment and build those emotional muscles. We want to model emotional language regularly too. So instead of us saying, I'm fine, whew, I feel relieved that the presentation is over. Or I'm feeling really stressed about this report. Oh man, I am feeling so relieved or accomplished that I got it done. I really didn't think I was going to get it done. Being specific, modeling that is really important too. Mindfulness, I mean, I talk about it probably all of the time. That's important to help us anchor emotional awareness. So, just trying to sit with our body and doing a body scan, just noticing their breath for a minute or two and then checking in. I personally like body scans. What do you notice? What body part is calling out right now? It might be achy, it might be sore, it might be tingly or hot or cold. What did you notice? Did you notice any urges to move or any thoughts about it? We just want kids to slow down enough to recognize what's going on inside. I love listening to different music, instrumental music, because sometimes we get caught up in the lyrics, right? So having instrumental music and having them notice what happens in their body as they listen, what's coming up for them as they listen. So, lots of practice is really important to help kids carry that skill into real life. I'm not expecting them to use it right now when emotions come up, unless we're doing structured teaching interactions. We're putting them in those situations like we know their sibling's going to come over and kick over their Lego, or a classmate is going to come and knock over their books or something, right? In those structured teaching interactions. But otherwise, we're going to give lots of different mood induction sort of opportunities throughout the day, right? Maybe you're using an emotion menu. I mean, we're only limited by our own creativity. I'm always saying that. So maybe an emotion menu or bingo card, right? They're writing three emotions that they feel often, three that they want to get better at recognizing, maybe one that's really hard to talk about. Or an emotion detective journal, right? Noticing one emotion every day and identify what triggered it, but what did they notice in their mind, their body, their behavior, what helped, what didn't help. Maybe you're doing creative sorts of things like drawing or painting emotions, matching songs to feelings. Maybe you're creating an emotion wall, right? Whatever that is. There's lots of different things that you could do. Now, emotions only last, kids need to know this too, 60 to 90 seconds, right? In the body. We really only feel it for up to 90 seconds unless we keep fueling them. And we might be fueling them. There could be triggers in the environment. We might be refueling them with our own thoughts. So, naming them just helps create that distance so we're not spiraling with them and we really ended up at that 90-second mark, right? It just helps us take back control. So, if you really want to build self regulation, this is key. This is foundational. Emotional literacy isn't soft, it's strategic, right? We really need to make sure kids are able to name their emotions accurately. It's just a critical tool at the end of the day to help them understand their experiences. It helps them manage their stress. It helps them build empathy and just make better decisions. So every day we want to make it a habit. You do it, they do it, everybody do it, right? Check in, not just with how are you feeling, but exactly how are you feeling? How exactly are you feeling? Getting more specific so that they can be more empowered, right? When we name it, we can tame it. When we feel it, we can heal it. That's really important. I'll leave it there for today. Thank you for joining me. Be sure to subscribe so you're not missing any of these episodes of Overpowering Emotions, especially as we come up, because I'm going into the functions and the needs and the specific strategies for specific emotions. So that's really important. You don't want to miss those. I will have a resource package put together here. So for now, today, emoji deck. I'll put in a feelings wheel, maybe some body clue charts as well, some scenario ideas that you can maybe use. But I will have more resource packages as we go, especially once we start looking at the function and the needs of emotions. So thank you for joining me today. Until next time, help those kiddos be bold and courageous, and I will see you then.